feel like Gordon Bombay would have taken his career to even further heights.
Everything's flashy, everything's cocaine, everything's
Fun.
Open wide for some soccer.
I don't care what you think about what your personal thoughts are at home. I care that you hate the Cowboys.
Call this college rule.
Welcome, everybody, to the Sports Experience Podcast. Chris, Dom, a couple of comics who live here in Tucson. We're in the middle of a block episode right now. Before we get started, though, I do want to say please follow all of our social medias. Give us comments, likes. We recently got a bunch of suggestions, which we're going to hop into, so keep that going. And, without any delay, man, let's just get into it, because this is going to be one hell of an episode.
Oh, yeah, it is.
And we're talking about possibly the greatest wrestler of all time.
One of our all-time favorites.
Macho Man, Randy Savage.
Hell yes. Oh, I can't wait.
We are in the block of real athletes.
Real wrestlers.
If you will. Just people that have had sports experience before they went into pro wrestling.
Like competitive sports, and
Yes.
achieving levels that, a normal person shouldn't achieve and then moving on.
Yeah, not high school. You know what I mean.
They're not Uncle Rico. I mean, these
there
guys
you go.
these guys are on the doorstep of being professional athletes.
Yes,
so,
that's perfect.
Randy Mario Poffo,
Yep.
born November 15th, 1952 in Columbus, Ohio. His dad, Angelo, was a professional wrestler back in the day. Lanny, his younger brother, also was a wrestler, and his mom, Judy, she was an immigrants from Germany that left after a mustachioed man took power in the 30s.
Yes, so mom had quite a upbringing because she actually escaped Germany as a JOO.
Cartman?
If you know what I'm saying. Keeping it light, people. They were such wrestlers. His dad traveled everywhere, that so much so that him and his brother actually were born in two different countries.
Yeah.
So
not cities, countries.
And I saw this thing where his mom just said, we just had to put down roots and have a normal, because this was when they were really kids and they really settled in Illinois. He
was into sports very early.
Oh, man.
And he was a very rambunctious kid.
I was just going to say.
Probably had ADHD, but not diagnosing it at the time.
We'll see later, because everybody was just like, he was a little OCD. And you're like, oh, yeah, they were kind of saying that when he was in fifth grade. Where they were just he was very compulsive.
Bouncing off the walls, too. He was into sports, as I said before, and he was really good at basically all of them. They said he didn't even have enough time for lady friends because he was into sports. Those were his ladies.
That's one thing I don't believe, but that's all right.
That's okay. Sometimes they don't love you back, though, as far as sports,
All right.
But his main sport was baseball.
Yes.
Baseball was his bread and butter.
And he gets signed right out of high school to be a catcher, outfielder, pretty much prospect.
Just an athlete.
Yes.
Because he was just a freak athlete.
Yes.
Signed by the Cardinals. But while he was catching in the minor leagues, he injured his shoulder in a collision at home plate. And it was his throwing shoulder.
And it was his right throwing shoulder, or as we call it in the biz, his jacking shoulder.
His jacking shoulder. Hey, that's why I learned it. Talk about it in one of my bits.
I know.
Learn how to do it twice.
I thought about you.
You
Not
did.
while I was...
I think
you
about
know what?
myself
Don't worry.
sometimes.
Don't worry about it. And this is the thing that you find, that he was so, like we were saying, a freak athlete, and he was so young at this point where he literally was just I was a switch hitter, but you know what? I was also a switch thrower.
Yeah.
People were like, wait, what? That's not a thing. Is that a thing? And he was like, yeah. So I learned how to throw with my left hand, and I was still a viable prospect coming up. But I saw something that I think he was trying out for the White Sox one time, and
As
they were
a first baseman, yeah.
he just looks weird. And it wasn't that it was bad. It would just that was their only comment, it just looks weird. And you're just
which is the dumbest thing ever. Do you know how bad the White Sox were at this point in time? You
and
need
that's why
bodies.
They could have gotten Savage, and they didn't.
They went the opposite of Savage. I mean, and that's what makes it sad. It's but when one door closes, God opens a window.
It's true.
For some Macho Manness.
It's true.
I mean, oh boy, did he ever, because the White Sox cut him.
And then, you know what? When God kills a cow, they make Slim Jims. I don't know. We're going to get into it. Cuts him, and then this is because he gets into the family business. Brother already into it. Dad still doing the old-timey, I mean, if you ever seen The Wrestler, that is so accurate.
Oh, right. Playing Super Nintendo with the neighborhood kids in a van.
Exactly. So, like, that's probably more accurate than you would ever imagine. So he gets into the family biz.
Yeah, after 4 years of minor league baseball. And, I mean, he was a viable player.
Yes.
It's just, had that injury not taken place, who knows? We only might know Randy Poffo, the all-star.
Well, I think in his last AAA, he hit 250 and had, like, 16 home runs. You know what I mean? Where you were just kind of like, oh, yeah, but he
looked weird, Chris.
He looked weird.
But you know what? There's a venue for people who look weird.
Yes.
That it's celebrated. The family business.
That's right. So he gets into wrestling with him and his father, and they're kind of touring the Midwest here a bit. They haven't really established their own thing, but they feel like they aren't getting pushed enough. So, like, obviously, like in these smaller like scenes, like there's certain like favoritism being played,
and there's pockets all over the
pockets.
country. There's not like one unifying like wrestling league. It's just a whole bunch of smaller and regional ones competing against each other.
Yes.
So when his dad starts the Intercontinental Wrestling ICW, which is like an outlaw organization, he's kind of salty that his sons aren't being pushed as far as how good they are and what they can bring to wrestling. So they go into the Memphis territory.
And this is where we get a little heated.
Yeah, we do.
I found this interesting because you see this later with like what the NWO does, but it's like fake.
Mm-hmm.
But what they were doing was, because they were like obviously the second tier wrestling organization in Memphis.
Yeah.
And what he was doing, what Macho Man was doing, was actually challenging somebody from a different organization, Jerry Lawler.
The King Lawler.
The King, who will come back later, who is just, the spider webs in wrestling. Jesus Christ.
Oh, my God.
But it was so interesting because Jerry came out and he was just like, yeah, our boss told us to not even acknowledge them.
Yeah.
And they're just going to go away. Because that's what they wanted. They wanted to, like, piggyback off of
exactly.
Because
if they can get any sort of publicity,
yes.
And like you said, there are as many, spider webs in here as a haunted house.
Oh, man, it's wild.
It's absolutely insane. But eventually, the ICW ends up going away because they keep it, despite how hilarious it was with Macho Man calling out the King.
Yes.
Like,
they eventually go away, but they're still in Memphis, and they end up joining up with the top, I forget what it was, the Memphis wrestling organization that had Jerry Lawler, and they ended up, it's kind of interesting because they like hyped this match to try and get the ICW kind of like to hype that up. It goes under. They end up having the match, but it's with the other organization.
Exactly.
It was like the other organization really thought that one through. They're like, yeah, keep hyping that up, guys.
You can spend all of the rest of your money hyping this, and we'll just take in all the dollars.
Yes.
Like, they're losing their minds, and I'm reaping all the benefits. God bless you, John Lovitz. Anyway, by 84, 85.
It's so good.
Right. Randy eventually becomes quite the star in this and catches the eye of the WWF.
And this is when the WWF is really starting to buy out all of the talent throughout all of these things and do what all kind of corporations do, which is like buy their top talent and kind of corrupt and get them to almost close. So like they're really unifying all of these smaller scenes. Like they came in and got Jerry Lawler, Macho Man, his brother. And then Macho Man brings a manager.
A manager. And it's a special kind of manager. A manager that, we didn't really see at the time in WWF.
That's right. We see it almost because he comes in, and it's kind of interesting. He has like his debut match where a bunch of managers, because this is the era of the manager. You can't be a wrestler out there without a manager. So they all kind of come out to
Bobby the Brain Heenan. You got Jimmy Hart, Mr. Fuji, Johnny Valiant, and classy Freddie Blassie.
Well, there's some of them that you're just like, obviously he's not going to go with those people, but it's just kind of funny. And then he introduces Miss Elizabeth, who we've never seen before. She comes out, and it is kind of like a what the hell is going on.
Well, a little bit thing about Miss Elizabeth. He had known her for quite an extended period of time up to this point. Chris.
They were if not married at this point, like almost married.
Yeah.
And in a relationship, and he actually had tried to sign her as like a commentator.
Which would have been great.
And Vince McMahon at the time was just like, no. She's going to be your manager, and we're going to bring her out in a sparkly-ass dress.
Nah, look at them titties.
Yes, and even though he was a heel, because he kind of was because he was a savage, he had this beautiful woman. That was like
You talking to Miss
dynamic.
Elizabeth?
Yes, that was the dynamic, and then it started to get a little. You know what? It was very 80s.
It was very 80s.
Midwest. If you know what I'm saying?
80s Midwest is a very good way of putting it.
There was a lot of men who could connect with the way Macho was treating it. I mean, his manager. She wasn't even
it wasn't. He wasn't even brought up that he was. She was his lady friend.
No,
it was just his manager.
It was just his manager. And let's go back a little bit to get. I want to talk about his voice.
Yes,
because this was in Memphis.
I love it.
Where they were talking about how he needed a better gimmick. And he said, his brother said, well, who do you think is like the best guy that does like promos? And it was like, I forget the guy's name because it was a weird ass name, but the guy literally did like oh yeah.
That man's back hair had back hair. I saw a video.
I was just going to say, I almost said that he was so hairy. And then Mach doesn't do what he was doing. He does like an impersonation.
Yeah.
And he lets out a, oh yeah. And,
oh yeah.
And his brother just like looked at him like that was it. And what I found so interesting, his brother just goes, and I never heard his original voice ever again.
Oh no.
It was that moment where he became Macho Man. And
could you imagine being his lady at the time though?
But
just
this is
going like, getting it on from regular to, what the fuck was that?
But
Excuse me, Randy, the power of Christ compels you.
This is what Hogan was saying, was he had never seen somebody live his character more, where he was probably super abusive to Miss Elizabeth, where he would show up, lock her in the locker room before, and then go and like tell all the wrestlers. And Hogan did it so good because he just goes, and it's in Mach's voice. He just goes, "Who? Don't be looking at Miss Elizabeth, boys!" Like he's just like
private meeting.
All right.
No,
Hogan.
but when you think about it, like he had that intensity. He's like one of those method actors.
Yes.
And I think it was because of who his dad was growing up around that, seeing that professionalism as far as professionalism to your craft, not necessarily as far as behavior, but
yes, to the
that's
craft.
what made him so good and so likable or so hated as a wrestler. But like you couldn't deny he bought in full force to this character.
Well, I feel like because he bought in full force to this character, he could just kind of walk into interviews and say almost anything, which we see.
Oh, God.
He has some of the best interviews across all of wrestling forever.
Yeah.
It's insane to even think about. Like, we're going to get into some of them, but like,
if they had wrestling Oscars, he would be the
Oh,
Daniel
my God.
Day-Lewis of wrestlers.
Yes. And sometimes he's like doing it with other wrestlers and they're looking at him like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's so good.
I can't look away, though.
So he's in the WWE. Miss Elizabeth's his manager. He goes and fights. So he goes to WrestleMania.
Yes, he does.
WrestleMania 3. This is kind of his breakout.
This is still an iconic match. I mean, granted, he's been climbing the ladder up until this point, but WrestleMania 3 is where, even though he's heel, everyone kind of falls in love with him because of how great this match was. Because of WrestleMania 3, what was it? Andre the Giant, Hulk Hogan headlining.
And then it's
Pontiac Silverdome, RoboCop providing security at this juncture.
And it's Macho Man versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who Ricky the Dragon Steamboat was like a babyface and Macho Man was a heel. And they interview Ricky after his death, and he said that match, Macho Man, this gets into his OCD, but they would were literally going over it step by step, beat by beat, weeks leading up to it, and they literally had like legal pads filled with just like notes of like, I'm going to do this. And Ricky said he was just like, it was over 150 separate moves, and like you would just like
call them out,
beating it like beat by beat, and he was just like, and we hit all of them.
Move 86.
Like, yes, but then that's the thing that, because best interviews ever, like you can't deny his voice is both awesome and hilarious, but on top of that, he's probably one of the greatest wrestlers. That's what everybody was talking about, was like he almost like made what wrestling could be, because it was very not cheesy, but not like fucking beat by beat was always hitting.
It was well choreographed. Hulk Hogan even talks about he would like all hours of the night be wanting to work on moves.
Call him and talk and ask him like, well, what are we going to do with this and this? Like, and that's what he didn't want, which I always thought was really commendable when you think about it. He was just like, if there's a small lull, that can like take everybody out of the mystique of this being like a legit fight.
Well, and don't get me wrong, there are times where you can, pepper in like stuff that calls for it, like almost improv in the moment. Because as we said, all these guys are just physical yes-anders,
Oh, man. You know what it is? It's wrestling, but with jazz.
With jazz.
But you're right, because
jazz cigarettes.
But they do improv, but like in the thing, they almost have to know when to improv.
Exactly. And I think the second generation wrestler, you just know.
Yes.
And you just know he was that smart. And while he's a big guy for like society, he's not the biggest wrestler.
No.
But he's the most athletic of wrestlers.
Jumping off that top rope.
Oh, God.
That's when I think of Mach, I think of the elbow getting ready to come down and him just like as high as you can think. Like, so after this iconic match, which really cements him as a legit wrestler, because like you were saying, they had Hogan against Andre the Giant, and everybody feels like the Mach and Ricky Steamboat match like almost was like that was the headlining match looking back on it.
Yeah, no, people will continue to talk about something that happened in 1987. That's how amazing that is. I mean, but I want to get into his costumes before we can move on.
All right. Now,
I loved reading and hearing about this.
This is a interesting one because Hogan gives him almost his stylist.
Yes,
So
Michael Braun.
Michael Braun.
Florida stylist. He made costumes. Basically, how do we make him macho, Chris? How do we make Randy Savage macho?
So, and this is the great thing that the stylist, Michael Braun, said, is he goes, well, I used to make clothes for like wrestlers and pimps. And when you make clothes for these people, you do it on reference.
Yep.
And he just came in and he just goes, I want to be as macho as I can. And he just goes, and it started pretty calm.
It was like pretty tame, like feeling more macho.
And then he just goes, and then it became a point where I put writing on everything. Everything had tassels.
The neon colors.
You could almost see the evolution of it because like when they're talking about it, you're like, oh yeah, it really almost was like he had like pants and then maybe he would have like a vest and then it almost became
sunglasses.
Like sunglasses, hat, full suit, and you're just like, oh my God, it really became amazing.
Miss Elizabeth was my bottom bitch.
Yes. And I thought that was interesting too because she really didn't change from just the sparkly dress. I kind of thought he might have.
That would have been hilarious if that happened.
Vince McMahon even said, because he was just like, and Macho Man was making a lot of money in this time. Every single one of those outfits came out of his pocket.
Yeah,
that was his thing. We weren't buying these out. This wasn't us. And I bet you saw this when Hogan was just like, oh yeah, the stylist made so much money off of him.
Yep.
And you're just like, yeah, I bet he had closets full of this, just like tie-dye, whatever.
No,
he had so many different.
It was like neon and like cowboy hats and I mean, it was just
Did you hear the one where he bought a Ferrari and had to return it because his hats couldn't fit in the trunk?
Yep. Oh God.
He's just like, well, I'm Macho Man.
Macho Man, I need the trunk space for my hats, Gene. So, 87, he keeps chugging along out of the success of the WrestleMania match. Ends up starting some feuds with people called the Honky Tonk Man.
So, and what a weird ass time just in everything.
Yeah.
Because we took the Honky Tonk Man and we were like, oh yeah, yes, Elvis impersonator. Yes, there you go. I saw this thing where he was the first one to actually, because what Randy Savage used to do was he used to put Elizabeth in front of him and be like, "You're not going to hit my woman." Honky Tonk was the first one to shove her to the ground, and Honky was just like, "It wasn't my idea." But man, was it great TV.
Savage probably told him to do. He's like, Randy, I don't think that's such a good idea. Push her down, asshole.
She needs to learn.
He's almost got that motivational speaker, Matt Foley, like pauses where he's like,
yes. Yeah, so he starts it up with the honky tonker, the man. And then 88, 89,
oh, yeah.
he wins King of the Ring. Mm-hmm. And does he become champ right then?
Yeah.
Yes, he becomes champ right then. And he's, yes. And he's fighting with the honky tonk man. And I think the Heart Foundation comes out.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And they're like,
and everybody.
And they're jumping them. That's when they used to jump fools. And this is interesting because this is when Hogan comes out and saves them, and
they join forces.
In this era, because they join forces, they actually, Hogan was talking about, they actually become good friends in this time. Like we were saying, he gives him his stylist, him, Hogan, the Hogan's wife and Elizabeth, they're all like hanging out outside of this. This is going to come back. It
will come back.
That's why I'm bringing it up.
Boy.
And they become kind of like tag team partners called Mega Powers.
Mega Powers, which is like super best friends.
I was just going to say, the names of everything back then, I love it because nobody was checking anybody. They were just like, dude, we're going to be super best friends. Yeah. Like, all right.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
It was the 80s, and, we were...
We're on everything. It was pre-ecstasy. We're on coke. We're on roids.
That was the thing with Jake the Snake he was talking about. Like, people were taking steroids mostly to recover, but people were taking a lot of cocaine.
Yes.
And
he was asked if he thought, or if he saw Mach doing it, and he said no. Did he think he was? And he said, yeah, we were all doing it. And you were just like, well, of course. Especially if you look at him
every once in a while.
Especially if you look at him later in the. Oh my God.
Well, he's on some other drugs later.
He's on so many drugs later.
Yeah.
WrestleMania 4, he comes back, retains his belt at 14. They were up for melees back then. That was the other thing, was there was just like a 14-man melee. You were just like,
some of them were like, all right, everybody, back to the pile.
Yeah. Seriously though, it was such a, and this is why I think, just to go back to the Ricky Steamboat match, why everything was so choreographed and together. In those melees, you would just look over and two guys would just be like, like you're just like, all right, don't look at those guys.
Yep, zoom in there.
Yes, other guys. Yeah, it was not well choreographed in that time.
No. All right, so moving on, starting a big feud with the Mega Bucks with Ted DiBiase and Andre the Giant. SummerSlam pay-per-view there towards the end of 88. Basically just, still kicking ass for Macho Man Randy Savage.
Yeah, there's not a lot of, he's kind of looked at as like this up-and-coming heel almost. Because he's not, because I don't think anybody could have overtaken like Hogan at this point.
Nobody's taking over Hogan, but if you said who's the next most popular wrestler or who's the people's champion, it's Macho Man Randy Savage.
I would say that because he was like a lot of it was like, you're not supposed to like this guy, but you fucking love him.
You love him for his honesty, Chris, his charisma, being interviewed and such. So, yeah. Now we get into the 90s.
Yeah.
And things start getting a little weird.
So Miss Liz, or whatever, Miss Elizabeth, goes with Hogan as his manager. This kind of like all happens over like a couple of...
And it's all overlapping too.
Yes.
All these different things.
I was going to say, there's so many things that kind of overlap. He kind of gets this new woman called Sensational Sherry.
Yeah.
Him and Hogan beef because of the Miss Elizabeth thing, and he accidentally eliminates him from the Royal Rumble.
Yeah.
Which... obviously, Mach can't see reason in this. You know what I mean?
He doesn't have to. He's macho.
He's macho. He's Macho Man. So now he kind of like, what was the Mega Powers is kind of like, he starts to be in Hogan's shadow of this heel again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, Hogan takes his girl. Him and Miss Elizabeth are actually having a bunch of problems outside of the ring.
Lots of marital issues.
So that makes it even weirder.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know where to go from this because it's so crazy.
Well, I mean, they do end up getting married.
So they're in the midst of, like, not quite being separated, but they are. But in the story of the WWE, Sensational Sherry, his new manager, turns on him, and out of the audience,
This was so awesome, dude.
Miss Elizabeth comes out and just, like, gives her one little kick, and you're just like, all right. And she just kind of rolls out of the ring. And then they hug. And then, like, later on, a couple episodes or whatever, he, like, asks her to marry him. And you're like, oh, no, the Savage is settling down.
No. But in reality, it's not happening.
Yeah, they're literally, like, on the verge of getting divorced. So they get married in the show. And then I think, like, 6 months later, we'll get more into wrestling, but, like, she goes up and stays with Hogan.
Yeah.
And this is what we were talking about, because they were, like, really close friends. And this is, like, the break in their relationship was Hogan didn't know that she didn't say anything and just kind of dipped out. And then Macho showed up and caused a huge scene. And
very huge scene.
Cops called, and this is all at, like, Hogan's house. And
anything goes in Florida, Chris.
Well, he said he was like, you should have called me and told me she was here. You should have called me and told me she was here. He's like, I didn't know, brother. So it was just a bunch of, bullshit leading into him semi-retiring.
Yeah, semi-retiring. This is the sad part.
I was just gonna say, this was what was so weird, because his personal life kind of was falling apart, and then whatever happened with, like, Vince McMahon and, like, the WWE, they said, look, we don't really want you wrestling on TV anymore.
Yeah.
We want you to be a commentator.
But he could still wrestle. He had so many reps left in him, because he's barely 40, if not even 40.
And I didn't know if they felt like his story had run its course.
The story never not runs its course.
But that's what I mean. But they were saying, because you tried to bring him on as a commentator, and it was almost like his voice was too grating, and it lost its, like, mystique, because it was the shit when you would hear it for these little interviews.
The interviews, Let's get into the interviews. So, which one do you want to do first?
Oh, the cream always rises.
Cream always rises.
So he gets in, he's talking shit to
Mean Gene.
Well, I forget what wrestler he's talking about.
Oh yeah,
because I think it was, like, the guy he beat for the Intercontinental, Tito Santana.
Tito Santana, yeah.
And he's just like, because I'm the cream, and he just starts pulling out these little creams.
It's like a mad magician, or like your grandpa would do. Like, is this behind your ear?
It was so, and because he has this whole speech about just, like, half and half. I don't even know what to tell you, man. He's just like, and I'm the cream. Pulls another one out. Like,
Coffee Mate should just use that and pay his estate for a commercial now.
My God, like,
Coffee Mate rises to the top. No. Coffee Mate.
He just keeps pulling them out.
Yes. I was telling you last week the John story before the roast. He just sends me that out of nowhere.
Well,
I about died.
John is the cream of the crop. That's the point. That was the point. That was because he has, when in the middle of it, you're like, what is he talking about? And then at the end, he kind of, like, ties it together, and you're like, okay.
Rises to the top.
Okay. My favorite of all time, middle of an interview, he just goes, yeah, whatever, Dingleberry. The other wrestler just goes, my name's John Terry, not Dingleberry. That had to have been improv, because it was so unbelievably good.
I don't care. That's one of the funniest fucking things.
It's my favorite. That one, and there's this one time he's 100% on drugs. Mean Gene, always the guy that's interviewing him, he just goes, well, Mean Gene, just goes on. And you can see, because he's just, like, talking about nothing, and he's just like, and then the beat just goes on. And Mean Gene just looks at him like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's the best.
Oh,
he's the best interviewer of all time.
I've got his number.
Interviewee.
And it's number 2. Like, what the fuck, Macho Man?
He's the best. There's so many others that are so good too.
But he doesn't really settle into his commentator role.
It just that's
doesn't
not work. That doesn't work.
It doesn't work for someone who's still got matches left in him. So he decides to come back.
This is
an interesting one.
I was gonna say I never knew this story. I remember him on whatever WWE, and I guess he ran out of contract, but they were expecting him to just re-sign, which is kind of common for them to just kind of like, re-sign. And so literally it was Monday night and Vince McMahon goes, "Hey, where's Mr. Mach or whatever?" I don't know what they call each other. I imagine he had some nickname for him. But he was like, "Oh, he signed for WCW." So it happened that quick where like he was literally on the TV. They were watching the WCW and he like came out. And of course he came out and just started talking shit on Hogan.
Of course he did. Because, that's what Macho Man Randy Savage does.
Yes.
Kind of wish he lived longer to see where Hulk Hogan's life is now, because that would have been hilarious.
So he makes the jump, but a lot of people are making this jump. This is in like 94 when WCW is like the dominant. They have Hogan. They have like...
They're really trying to like be not only WWF's equal, but like exceed them.
Yes. Yes, 100%. Mm-hmm. So he comes in and really starts a feud with Hogan right off the bat. Starrcade.
Yep.
He to lead into this, so he has to like have these like... I deserve to, what I mean? He ends up beating a Stone Cold Steve Austin before he was Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was whatever he was before.
Steve Anderson or something.
Yeah,
something
bullshit.
Boring. Not even stunning people yet.
He beat the Butcher. That's what I mean. There were so many guys in this organization.
Yeah.
Ends up like going and beating Hogan he does beat Hogan. This is the one I wanted to bring up. So
okay.
In 95, 96. So he's kind of established himself again.
Yeah.
He stops wearing, like he's kind of wearing the colors, but he starts kind of getting more into just like the black and the leather.
Yeah, like black and leather more now. He looks like a biker at this point, not a pimp.
Way, way more on roids. This is where every time you see him, you're like, holy shit. And they have this thing called World War III, which I can't... There's nothing like wrestling to fucking diminish people's feelings.
Yeah,
I don't know what else to say about that. It's so good.
They should have called it Vietnam II Electric Boogaloo because that sounds more like wrestling than anything else.
That would have been perfect. It's a 60-man, 3-ring battle royale. This is what I mean. It was just
is just like everyone back in the pile.
It's just a fucking melee. Nothing is. It's like chaos.
They took their jobs, Chris.
It's so much chaos that Mach wins at the end, and Hogan doesn't even see, like, he's just like, wait, what? Like, he's still like fight, like, it's chaos. So he wins over some controversy, over some bullshit, you know what I mean? And then they bring back, which I thought was kind of a bad move, but was wrestling. They bring back Miss Elizabeth.
Yep. And that is not a very good thing at this juncture in Mach's life.
Well, just in both of their lives.
Yeah.
Because he starts doing like a program with Flair. And that's the thing is like in this WCW era, it's like all the wrestlers fight all the wrestlers you know. You know what I mean? So she kind of comes back and gets with this wrestler called Lex Luger.
Oh, boy.
I'm just going to touch on this where she ends up ODing later with him in like a hotel room.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody was saying was just like, she probably never should have came back to like the wrestling life.
No, it was the worst thing for her. And she was involved with Flair with all the fake pictures of them together.
There was just like
a bunch of Mach nuts.
Yeah, there was just like a bunch of shit like that where it was just like weird stuff that like, because everybody is so in on their personal lives that they're almost just kind of like, yeah, we should do this. And you're like, should you?
Opiates and alcohol, I think that's a great choice at the same time.
Yes.
No, it's not.
It's horrible.
It's horrible. But Mach finds a new lady here in WCW.
This is where I'm headed.
All right, oh boy, here we go.
And everybody feels like off of Miss Elizabeth coming back and kind of like this roid explosion.
Yeah.
He gets this because he meets this stripper at a strip club. Let's just be honest.
Well, who else are you going to meet at a strip club, Chris?
Not a bouncer, I can tell you that much. Not a fucking bouncer. I think her real name was like Stephanie something, but she goes by Gorgeous George.
You remember when Jerry called Costanza that one time? How about Gorgeous George over here?
Oh my God, it's so good. But she comes in as this thing that you kind of know much of having. It was just like an eye candy next to him. She says they were partying so fucking hard. Ecstasy, roids, uppers, downers. She said it was like a lot of pills.
Zib, zabbers, dupers.
A lot of
Husker
ecstasy.
do's, Husker don'ts.
You know what I'm talking about.
Thank God. Basically the Joe Dirt cavalcade of drugs, I guess.
I was just going to say, because if you watch some of these, because leading up before this, beginning WCW and all of the WWF, that's when the interviews were amazing.
Yeah.
This coming up, this is where you start to be like, oh, this guy's not quite there.
Yeah, like where it's silly because it's like, oh, he's playing a character.
Yes.
Or it's like he called someone a dingleberry. Now it's like, whoa.
Because he's 20 years into a drug psychosis into this character and like all of that shit where you're just like, oh, this is getting scary. And Gorgeous George talks about this one time, and you can bring it up. They're in red outfits, matching red.
So good.
Sparkly outfits. And she just goes, we were so high. I can't believe we got words out of our mouths, where he's like literally on stage being like, I ain't no punk bitch. And the commentators are like, okay, so we have no idea who he's talking about.
But like you could see them when they walked out. You're like, there is something not quite right.
Yes. So they were completely fucked up on drugs. She ends up breaking up with him, and that was pretty much her career.
It's not like she has any marketable skills, Chris.
I was just going to say that was kind of what his thing was, bringing her in. He was just kind of like, you're not going to be like a Miss Elizabeth where you go on to somebody else. Like, this is it. So they break
one
up.
Chance.
NWO comes in, and he really starts to become the second fiddle again to Hogan. And you see him, because he almost becomes too ripped.
It's weird. Like when you see him in that Baywatch episode, or you see him later in Spider-Man.
In Spider-Man.
The first Spider-Man, where it's just like, in the late 70s, probably through the mid to late 80s, you could say, I mean, I don't know if he was taking steroids, but it looked natural.
Yes.
All that muscle mass looked natural. Now it's just like, these are popcorn muscles. This is ridiculous.
And it was getting ridiculous, and he was getting almost like too stiff in the ring, and there was like all kinds of stuff like that. During the NWO era was kind of like you could just tell it was like the tail end of his career, where some other guys could kind of like keep going. It was like, oh, okay, he does like one last tag team with Sid Vicious.
But he's pushing 50 now.
And he's pushing 50, and he's been in the game for, I mean, as long as anybody.
Since baseball ended?
Yes.
When he was in his early 20s?
And they were saying he was the first wrestler to be in a major motion picture in the Spider-Man. That was like the first one, because like Hogan had all of his stuff, and like, but that was like this like, oh shit, we can actually act in these roles.
Well, have you seen any of Hulk Hogan's thespian endeavors? God awful.
Except for Suburban Commando. That made us all realize something. I don't know what.
It was standing ovation bad.
They were insane, which makes them good. You know, when like something comes back around and you're like, all right. It's like watching the Blade trilogy. You're like, this is horrible and fantastic.
And I love it. It's like watching anything by Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yeah.
Anything.
Fucking The Quest.
Sudden Death.
Lionheart. Any of them. I love Lionheart. Just to... Oh, man.
You murdered a mascot!
Are we overlooking this?
Anyway, so as Mach's career is kind of, dwindling, in retirement, he's still feuding with Hogan.
Still feuding with Hogan. Everybody else was saying, too, that he did well with his money. Obviously, the Slim Jim thing. I saw something where when he joined WCW, it didn't even cost him anything because he brought Slim Jim over. So it was like that kind of stuff where you're just like, oh, yeah, so he did really well. But still just hated Hogan. He ends up releasing. I mean, you guys all know one of the greatest rap CDs of all time. I don't even know why.
This is like the Chronic for wrestlers.
And well, for all of us.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
His brother had probably one of the sadder comments. He goes, Mach thought it was going to sell 50 million copies. It almost sold 50,000. You're just like, oh, jeez.
How many of those purchases were of camp value variety? You know, like, I'm going to say, like, at least I own this.
Yes.
I think one of my friends, he owns a Bruce Willis album,
nice.
Which is just,
that's what I mean.
John McClane.
You can hop on it. So his life is kind of going into a weird spot, and then he finds and reconnects with his high school girlfriend. I don't know if you saw this.
Basically, the chick before Miss Elizabeth.
Yes.
So just somehow reconnects with her and
gets married and kind of lives the last years of his life like
peacefully.
Yes, which I thought was so awesome because we're going to get into, he died, he had a heart attack while he was driving.
Oh man!
And pretty much died of a heart attack in his injuries with his wife there, but
like he died before he hit the tree.
Yes,
like,
yes.
I mean, his wife sadly in the car with him had to redirect the car and stop it into a tree because he died.
But of all the bullshit going through of like just his life and like just kind of like the early retirement that was forced on him and like Miss Elizabeth and all of that kind of stuff, even though he definitely was not a great partner, if you will.
No. I mean,
I'll never defend that. I'm just defending him as a wrestler and a man. Definitely nice to see how his life kind of the last couple of years, that
he found some peace at the end, which
Yes.
a lot of these wrestlers do not find at all in their lives.
Exactly.
Like some of these guys we're talking about probably might not end very well for them.
Yes.
But we'll see. But yeah, the Mach finding some peace there at the end, which is nice.
And nice because he was always one of my favorite wrestlers, and yeah.
How could he not be?
I know. How could he not be?
I mean, Macho Man Randy Savage. Oh, yeah.